Good morning, everyone. It's a lazy Saturday morning and I should be asleep, but here I am, up early, making coffee, getting ready to do some words for NaNoWriMo, and here to talk to you guys. I'm excited. First week of NaNoWriMo down, and I am woefully behind, but I kind of expected that. I tend to do more writing on the weekends. I just naturally wake up earlier. So it's the nice, quiet moments of the house. I mean, it takes me back to my first moments of writing, and it's when I really find my solace. But that and a cup of coffee and my dogs, and all's right in the world, right? Isn't that how it goes? But today, before I get my writing done, I wanted to talk to you all about something that kind of flew into my radar this week when scrolling TikTok. Actually, I think I saw it first on Facebook. A TikToker kind of called out Rebecca Yarros for her poor pronunciation and usage of a minority language. And that video, it really struck a chord with me for a couple of reasons. And I'll make sure to link it down below. So if you haven't seen it, please go watch it in its entirety. It's really great. And the way that she talks about how her language was used, and not only used, but abused and in many ways butchered, and how American authors use minority languages in that way, and especially American fantasy authors. And I have to say, I agree with her, not just because I've seen it done, but because I've done it myself. So we're going to get into that just a little bit today, and it's going to be a fun conversation. So I read a lot of fantasy. Fantasy is actually my go-to genre. I love it. I'm just absorb it and probably consume way more than is healthy. I write it, so it's just like, maybe that's just the world that I live in, right? Which is totally fine. But even as I read, I've noticed that unless it's like super high epic fantasy, we're talking like The Wheel of Times. My dogs have to say hello. And even Brandon Sanderson, like, I don't know, he's kind of a little iffy, but so many of these authors, they pull from minority languages or languages that are not as commonly used. Not only because they're not used, so it sounds more fantasy, but because they just sound more fantasy, which in some ways, it's like part of my brain is going, yes, I get it. I understand, because again, I did that. But now, after watching her video, it's very much like oh, yeah, I did that. Ooh, I did the bad thing. So what ends up happening, and I'm speaking from experience here, is you're writing a fantasy book, and you need to call a race of being something different than what they are. Like, instead of calling them dragon, you're going to call them drac, because dragons have the power of vision and foresight, and so you can call them a drac. People who have read Invalid understand exactly where I'm coming from with this. So you plug it into Google Translate. You're like, okay, Google Translate, what is this? And Google Translate tells you that Czech for dragon is drac. So you literally just plug that word into your manuscript without any form of check or without any form of checking it to make sure that it is used properly or conjugated properly or pronounced properly or any of that. And this video that was on TikTok, it started with an interview by Rebecca Yarros, who wrote and published, sorry, it is way too early in the morning, who wrote Fourth Wing. And she butchers all of the pronunciations of these names. And I can promise you that she literally plugged it in to Google Translate, what she wanted it to say, and then just copy and pasted it over. And in some cases, she even missed the accents, which changes the pronunciation and the meaning of the word completely. So that's a good case of what not to do. And why is it bad? Well, I hate to be like all cultural appropriation, but it definitely toes that line of being something, you're taking something that is not yours, that many people identify with, and you're basically making a mockery of it. You're not valuing the words, you're not representing them properly, you're not taking care of them properly. And like I said in the beginning of this video, I have done this. It is, as she says in her TikTok, it is a very American thing to do. We take our fantasy stories and we need a unique language and we go to the minority languages and use them. And in my case, it wasn't so much a minority language. It was just where I wanted the center of magic to be in England. I wanted the center of magic in England to be in Prague. I love Prague. I've been there. I love the culture. I love the people. So that was where I wanted magic to be. And I did the naughty thing. I put the words into Google Translate and I put them into my book. And you know what? I was wrong. Not even just in using the language, but in how I use the language. So this brings me to what I really, really want to talk about today is how to use minority or unfamiliar languages to you. Because this is actually the second instance of this I've seen this week, especially in some of the groups that I'm in on Facebook. Earlier this week, someone brought up a screenshot of a book that they were reading. I couldn't tell you the book. And they said, I'm a native Spanish speaker. And in this book, he keeps calling this girl Orange, and I can't figure out why. What am I missing? And in the comments, a lot of people are like, well, later in the book, he talks about how orange, how that word is also used for like soulmate or other half. But everyone in the comments who actually spoke Spanish said, I've never heard this before. And these were from different cultures and dialects around the world that spoke Spanish that had never heard it. It was like this. It was like when Bay first started to take off, but the people who actually use that type of word were like, that's not what it means. It's very much what this instance was. So when you are using minority languages or languages that you are not familiar with, the first thing you need to do, sorry, she nudged the microphone, is find someone who speaks that language and is familiar with that culture. Because not only does speaking the language is important, but understanding the culture is important. And I'm going to use a lot of my own experiences here as I go through this. So if you have read Imdaland, and even if you haven't, I'm going to keep this spoiler free. The main guy calls the main girl Silmi. Now, this word means something that I got the translation correct. Well, rather Google got the translation correct, but what they didn't get is the male-female conjugation. So the way that the word is in the book is actually the male form of the word. But I didn't know this. Around the publication of the third book, someone from Prague reached out to me and was like, yo, I really love the Imdaland series. I love these books, but your usage of the language is so wrong. And she really helped me. She went through every single sentence and what I told her what it was supposed to mean, and she did it correctly and sent it back to me. And that's when I found out about the Silni issue, but we were so far into it, I was like, do I change it? Because I think it's supposed to be Silna with an A instead of with a Y. And I really waffled back and forth on that, and I probably should have changed it, but it's already in there and I'm just going to leave it. So that is what it is. But I did go back and I changed every single instance. Every single instance of check in the book was grammatically, like it was edited. It was so that it would be grammatically correct. And it was a lot of work. And not only because I needed someone who was familiar with the language, but also with the culture, because some of the things that I was saying would be said differently 50 years ago. And so because she had grown up in that culture, she knew how to phrase it like how her grandparents would phrase it. And that was really, really vital for how that storyline progresses, to have that knowledge. And not only that, but to have the knowledge of the slang that is used in Prague for different streets or different suburbs, because when we got further into the story and they actually ended up in Prague, those things were very needed. So it's really important to find someone who understands not only the language, but the culture, because those things are just so vital in order to be utilizing a language that you are not familiar with. not only because you want to make sure that the usage of it is correct, but that the pronunciation is correct. And I think that's the biggest faux pas that Rebecca Yarros has done, especially in that interview, is she talks about how to pronounce these words when she doesn't know how to pronounce these words, which kind of begets a little bit of a gray area. If you're being inspired by a language and you're kind of taking root of different things and you're meshing them together and creating your own words, then you totally get right to choose whatever pronunciation you want there. 100%. You've basically, yes, you've taken different languages, but you've created something new. But if you are letter for letter using a word from a language that is not yours, you do not get to choose the pronunciation of that word. You do not. That is not in the purview of how you get to use that language. You need to talk to someone who speaks that language, talk to the culture, talk to that language representative to make sure that you are pronunciating things correctly. There are certain words that in Imdalan that I will probably never say aloud. I know how to spell them. I know how to spell them with the accent, but there's a high chance that I would say them incorrectly, and I want to respect that language. I've learned, I've just since forgotten. I'm 40, guys. I'm old, and it's been a while since I've reviewed them. But after watching this video, I'm totally going to go back and review it, and I'm probably going to make a pronunciation guide for those books because I think it's so valuable for everyone to say them correctly. This whole experience has been very eye-opening for me as an author of kind of the what to do and what not to do. And I've done a good portion of it correctly, but the other part of it, I have not. I've misstepped a little bit. I did start out with those Google Translate translations, and luckily I was able to come in contact with someone who knew the language and was willing to help me. But on the other side of that, they need to be paid for their expertise and their experience. 100%. That should not be in question. Just like you would expect to pay someone at a business for their expertise and knowledge, you need to pay someone who is assisting in a language that you're representing in a book. Same way. However you choose to come to an agreement with that, but they do need to be paid for their time and their expertise. I think that's very important. I think it's as important as an editor because you are editing something that you are unfamiliar with. So just like you would pay an editor, you would pay this person as well. And I was really lucky to come in contact with this person because not only were they able to help me repair the check in the past books, but they were able to help me to translate it in future books. And then when it came time to do the audiobooks, which were produced through Audible, I was able to contact them to work with them and the voice actor who did the audiobooks to make sure that things were continued to be pronunciated correctly. So all around, it is just very important that we look at minority languages or languages that we are not familiar with very positively and that we respect them from beginning to end because we are using something that we are not familiar with and that is not ours. So in order to show respect for those countries and for those languages, it is so important that we do that through every step. And we don't just rely on Google Translate or AI translators to make those sentences and words correct. Because you don't want a silny when you need a silna. And you don't want sentences to be so poorly written that they are unreadable to others. I did do a video many, many years ago about why I don't translate the Czech in the Imdalan books, and I still stand by that reasoning. They are in a first-person perspective, at least the first book and a half are, and she doesn't understand Czech, so me translating them in the portions that she's telling her story from makes no sense because she doesn't understand what's being said. But if you get into later books in the series, when the Czech speakers are speaking Czech, they do translate as they go along. It's just written in line. It's not done with any parentheses or anything. But that brings me to another important part on why making sure that your translations are correct. Because if I'm doing that, if I'm writing out the Czech and then I'm translating and my translations are off, anyone who speaks that language is going to be like, wait, what? Huh? And I'm here to tell you, the second someone doesn't understand or recognizes that you are not representing or respecting their home language. I mean, I feel like I'm starting to sound like I'm just on repeat a little bit, but guys, it's just so important. We can do better as authors. We can do better as a community. And I think it's just so, so, so important. So as we go through, I mean, we're in the middle of NaNoWriMo right now, but that doesn't mean that this doesn't apply to any other time that you're writing. So, and it's not even just high fantasy authors. I mean, Imdalind is... it's a conglomerate. Let's be for sure. It starts out as like some Twilight-ish romance, melds into epic fantasy, and somehow ends up dystopian. So it's its own thing. It's doing its own thing. But it's not just epic fantasy that is like unique to this. It really is any book and any author specifically who is using a language. And I heard some people say like, oh, well, it's the editor. The editor should have been more on top of it. The editor should have done better. And I mean, yes, if you're going the trade pub route, totally valid. I'm an indie. I mean, someday I'll probably be trade pub, but right now I'm just solely indie. And that's all lies on me. But even if you are a trade pubbed author, I think you still need to do the due diligence to represent your work, because in the end, it is you that is on the line, not your publisher. No one's going around saying, oh, such and such a publisher dropped the ball on this. No, they're saying Rebecca Yarros dropped the ball on this. And so we need to really look at how we represent our characters, our minority languages, our minority characters, because this goes, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but my coffee's getting cold. I have some nano words to write. My oatmeal is cold. My dogs want to cuddle. So I'm going to call it there. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, because I do think that this is a conversation, not just a ramble that I get to make to a ring light at 5 o'clock in the morning. Comment below what your thoughts are on this, and if you think I missed something or need to cover something a little bit better, and we'll talk about it. Let's keep the conversation going, guys. I want to know what your thoughts are, both as an author and as a reader. So that's it for me. I'm going to go get my words in. My manuscript is waiting. My coffee's hot, and we're on the weekend. So happy writing, guys, or happy reading, whichever way you go, and we will see you next time. Copy.